Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
You don't expect betrayal to arrive wearing flip-flops and a sun hat, but that's exactly how it came for me, smiling in a text message, cheerful and final, as if I were just another casual acquaintance being let down gently. The plan was always that we'd go together, all of us, Mom, Val, her husband Greg, their kids, my weirdly tanned Uncle Rob, even that teenage girlfriend of my nephew's who wears eyeliner like war paint. It was Mom's big idea, a family cruise to reconnect and reset, she said last Thanksgiving, swirling cranberry sauce on her plate like she was stirring hope into mashed potatoes. I smiled, nodded, swallowed my feelings like the dry turkey on my plate, and said sure, because I always say sure. That's my role, low-maintenance Janine. The one who doesn't make waves. The thing is, I never really fit into the family dynamic. I was the only one who didn't marry rich, didn't have kids, didn't have a home with granite countertops and a dog that wears sweaters. I rent a modest two-bedroom in Glendale, work from home, editing textbooks that no one reads, and my last relationship ended via a post-it note on the microwave. Still, I showed up for birthdays, I remembered everyone's dietary restrictions. I even bought a damn swimsuit for this cruise, something with a pattern bold enough to trick people into thinking I'm fun. But none of that mattered. Because last Friday, while I was organizing the kitchen drawer, my phone buzzed and lit up with the final nail in the coffin. 4 words. We're boarding. Stay well. Just like that. No mention of where, no call, no ticket. Not even a lousy explanation. Just a vague little send-off like I'd been voted off the island. I sat there staring at my phone for so long the screen went black, then reflected my own face back at me, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, like someone who'd just been sucker-punched in the gut but couldn't decide whether to vomit or laugh. And hey race where it gets good, because I didn't cry. I didn't scream or throw the phone against the wall, although I did fantasize about it, briefly. No, I just stood up, walked to the fridge, pulled out the half-eaten slice of carrot cake I'd been saving for a special occasion, and ate it standing at the sink like a feral raccoon. If that isn't emotional stability, I don't know what is. I didn't call Val. I didn't text Mom. I just let them go. Let them sail away on their floating buffet of lies and passive aggression, thinking they'd bought themselves peace by trimming the problem out of the picture. You want peace? Fine. You'll get peace. You'll get silence so thick you choke on it. You'll get absence. Not the dramatic kind where people scream and sob and demand closure, but the slow, creeping kind that makes you question your own sanity. You'll get the kind of peace that leaves empty chairs and unanswered calls and a cold car where a person used to be. But first, I had to do one thing. It started as a whisper in the back of my head, just a small thought, almost too faint to notice. Go. Just go. No plan, no confrontation, no big speech. Just go. That night, I went into the garage. The overhead light buzzed on with that tired flicker, and there it was. My dad's car. A navy blue 1972 Chevy Nova that smelled like gasoline, dust, and old leather. It had been sitting there like a relic of a time when I still felt seen. My dad used to take me to Dairy Queen in that car after he'd picked me up from school. He'd let me shift gears while he worked the clutch, laughing every time I stalled it out. Before he died, he told me, someday, when it really matters, this car's yours. Well, Dad, I think it matters now. I slid behind the wheel and rested my hands on the steering wheel, the leather cool and stiff. There was still a pack of mints in the glove box, still a crumpled receipt for an oil change from 6 years ago. I felt like I was sitting inside a memory. And somehow, that memory felt more like family than the people currently sipping cocktails in matching t-shirts somewhere in the middle of the Caribbean. Hey Ray, something dumb I remembered at that moment. Cruises are usually about 5 days long. At least, that's what Bal told me. But when I checked the cruise line's site earlier, I saw that their specific trip, the one they were on, was listed as 8 days, not 5. Funny, right? 3 whole extra days of planning, coordinating, packing, and no one thought to mention it to me. I guess they figured I wouldn't notice. Or maybe they just didn't care if I did. You know what, though? That math doesn't even make sense. 5 minus 8 is, wait, that's -3. That can't be right. Or maybe I'm just bad at subtraction when I'm mad. Either way, don't be shy. Drop your corrections in the comments. I'm sure someone out there will be dying to. Back to the garage. I turned the key, half expecting the car to cough and die like everything else in my life. But no. She roared to life like she'd been waiting. Like she knew. I backed out slowly, closed the garage with the remote, and didn't even look in the rearview mirror. I didn't pack. I didn't write a note. I just took my phone, the cake fork still in my hand, and drove off into the kind of night that feels like it's daring you to disappear. And I did. There's a kind of anger that doesn't scream, doesn't throw plates or punch walls or demand attention like a tantrum. It sits quiet in your gut, low and steady like a pilot light in a stove, always there, always ready, just waiting for someone to flip the switch. And when it finally ignites, it doesn't explode, it simmers, slow and dangerous, like acid dripping through steel. That's the kind of anger I had been carrying for years, packed neatly inside like a suitcase full of bad birthdays, subtle digs, and being left out of family group chats where apparently major decisions about my life were made without me. After they left on that cruise, something shifted. It wasn't just the exclusion that burned. It was the confirmation of everything I had quietly suspected for years, but had never had the courage to say out loud. I was not wanted. Not really. I was tolerated. Like the brown banana in the fruit bowl, left to rot because no one wanted to be the one to throw it away, but no one was ever going to eat it either. The house was too quiet once they were gone, and not in a peaceful way. It was the silence of realization. It was the sound of years of biting my tongue echoing back at me. I walked through the living room, saw the suitcase still by the door, the one I had packed with care, 3 swimsuits, one cute, one practical, one I hated but packed anyway, a couple of sundresses, enough sunscreen for a small country. And that damn family t-shirt we were all supposed to wear for the group photo on the second day at sea. I laughed when I saw it. Not a real laugh, more like that cracked kind of laugh you get when you step barefoot on a Lego in the dark. It was the little things that pushed me over the edge, not the big betrayal itself. It was remembering how I offered to organize the cruise in the first place, how I volunteered to coordinate excursions and research ports, how I got shut down every time with some excuse about how Val already had a system. It was how Mom always took Val's side in everything, even when Val clearly didn't deserve it, even when she forgot Mom's birthday one year and I was the one who threw the party, bought the cake, and still got told I overdid it. It was remembering the time they left me out of a family dinner because they thought I might not want to come all the way across town, like I wasn't a grown woman with a car and GPS. And yes, I remember that exact moment when Val told me, over a brunch I wasn't supposed to be invited to, that maybe it's just easier when things are peaceful. That word stuck with me like a splinter in the back of my throat. Peaceful. What she meant was quieter. What she meant was without me. Because my presence disrupted their neat little narrative of family perfection, because I reminded them that love wasn't always clean and easy, because I didn't wear beige or vote like they did or keep my mouth shut when Greg made one of his casually sexist jokes. I wasn't the kind of person who raged in public. I didn't post Facebook rants or call people out at Thanksgiving dinner. I swallowed it. I smiled. I played along. And then they left me behind, and it was like someone finally flipped that switch. So I did what I had never done before. I let it rise. I let the anger come up, and instead of stuffing it back down like I always had, I let it fill me up like a tide. I walked around the house and looked at the framed photos on the wall, all perfectly staged memories where I was either cropped out, shoved to the side, or missing entirely. I thought about my dad and how he was the only one who used to really talk to me, the only one who didn't treat me like I was made of glass or garbage, depending on the day. He would have seen this coming. He would have known the truth. Then, around midnight, I found myself standing in the garage again. The house behind me was dark and still, the fridge humming in the background like a bored witness. I stood there barefoot on the concrete, keys in hand, staring at the Nova. I hadn't told anyone I still had the keys. After Dad died, Val had tried to claim the car, said it made more sense for her husband to have it, since Greg actually knows about cars. I said nothing, but I kept the keys. It was my quiet little rebellion, my one act of resistance. I stood there for what felt like an hour, keys clenched so hard the metal cut into my palm, thinking about how easy it would be to just drive away and never look back. I imagined the sound of the tires on gravel, the smell of old gasoline, the road stretching out ahead like some kind of escape route from a life that had slowly erased me, inch by inch, smile by smile. And I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the car like it was a lifeboat, and the house behind me was already halfway underwater. Then I took a step forward. And another. Until I was standing next to the driver's side door, heart thudding like a drum in my throat. I looked at the keys. I looked at the night outside. And I realized something dangerous. I didn't need to yell to burn it all down. I just had to leave. The road didn't care who I was or where I came from, and that felt like the first real mercy I'd been granted in a long, long time. Somewhere between state lines and fast food wrappers, I stopped thinking about where I was going and started focusing on the fact that I was finally, truly going at all. The Nova hummed beneath me like an old friend whispering, "Just keep moving," and I did, with the windows down and the radio tuned to whatever backwoods station wasn't preaching hellfire or selling used tractors. I didn't need a playlist or a destination. I just needed distance, and I was good at that. Turns out disappearing gets easier the more you practice it. Back home, well, what I used to call home, they had taken a lot from me. Not in the literal sense, though even that came later. It was death by 1,000 cuts, so quiet I didn't even know I was bleeding. It started years ago, when I was about 14, the day I brought home a failing grade in algebra and Val smugly announced at dinner that she'd never gotten below AB in her life. Mom looked at her like she'd just laid gold at her feet, and then turned to me and said, "Well, maybe math just isn't your thing, sweetie," in that saccharine tone that always felt like being patted on the head with a brick. That was the first time I realized that my mistakes defined me in ways my accomplishments never could. But Dad was different. He saw the parts of me the others couldn't be bothered to notice. He didn't praise me for the things I failed to be. He loved me for what I already was. When I told him I didn't want to go to prom, he took me to a drive-in movie instead. When I lost my first job and thought the world had ended, he told me, sometimes the wrong thing clears the way for the right one. He didn't need me to shine. He just needed me to be real. And in a family obsessed with images, that made him the only one who ever really knew me. After he died, everything shifted. Not in the way grief usually does, where people huddle together and cry and support each other through the mess. No, my family used his absence like a chance to tighten ranks. Mom hardened like clay left in the sun. Val took over as emotional landlord, handing out judgments like eviction notices, and I slowly became the afterthought. I'd call and get voicemail. I'd show up and find out dinner had already been eaten. Once, I missed a family event entirely because they moved the date, and no one told me. When I asked why, Val shrugged and said, "We just figured you wouldn't want to come all the way across town." They didn't even lie well anymore. So driving away wasn't a decision, it was inevitability. And that car, my dad's car, was the last piece of him I had left. They tried to take even that from me after the funeral. Val pushed to have it sold, claimed the estate would benefit more from cash. She talked about Greg needing a car for his side business, said I had no garage of my own, that I was still in that apartment phase. But Dad had told me it was mine, and I kept the keys like a secret, like a promise between us that nobody else could break. Now, cruising through small-town America with bugs slapping the windshield and rest stop coffee cooling in the cup holder, I felt like I was finally fulfilling that promise. I didn't take their money. I didn't take their pity. I took my damn car and my damn self and I left, which in their eyes probably made me look like the villain. Let them think that. Let them have the story where I'm the problem again, because this time, I was finally choosing it. Funny thing is, you learn a lot about yourself when there's nothing around to reflect you. No family dinners to sit through in silence, no subtle corrections when you speak too loudly, no sideways glances when you show up in jeans instead of slacks. Just the road and the rumble of an engine that still had life in it, somehow. Every mile I drove was like peeling off a layer of skin I didn't know I'd been wearing. I was raw and unsure, but I was finally real. I stopped in a place called Lakeview, a town so small it barely existed on the map. The motel smelled like mildew and regret, but it had hot water and nobody asked questions. I parked the Nova where I could see it from the room window and left the curtains cracked, just enough to keep an eye on the only thing I owned that still mattered. I slept like I hadn't in months, dead to the world, dreams mercifully empty. The next morning, I walked to a diner 2 blocks down and ordered eggs over medium, toast, and coffee that tasted like it had been reheated since the Nixon administration. The waitress called me Han and didn't ask why my eyes looked like I'd been underwater too long. I paid in cash, left a $5 tip, and walked out feeling like maybe I wasn't falling apart so much as falling out of place, finally on purpose. But peace, as usual, didn't last. 3 days into my accidental road trip, I stopped at a gas station in Nebraska to refill both the tank and my sanity. I was halfway through pumping when I noticed the guy next to me, mid-50s, tan, wearing a fishing hat and flip-flops, staring at the Nova like he was seeing a ghost. At first I thought he was just a car guy, admiring the classic. But then he did something that turned my blood cold. He pulled out his phone and took a picture. Not like a quick snap, either. He zoomed in. Got the plates. I didn't say anything. I finished pumping, paid in cash, and drove off like nothing happened, but something in my gut twisted like a knife. He knew the car. He recognized it. And suddenly I remembered Val's friend, Doug, the one who collected vintage cars and posted about them online like they were museum pieces. Doug had been at the funeral. Doug had seen me take the keys. And Doug had a second home in Nebraska. By the time I got to the next town, my phone had 3 missed calls. All from Val. I didn't answer. But I knew then. They were looking for me. The cruise came to an end just as perfectly as it had begun, with fake smiles over buffet breakfasts and polite nods exchanged like business cards between people who were pretending to be closer than they actually were. The ship docked, the bags were rolled onto curbs, and the shuttle buses arrived right on schedule. Everyone looked sun-kissed, well-rested, and 100% unaware that the storm waiting at home had been brewing quietly in their absence, and this time it wasn't going to pass over. Val stepped into the house first, dragging her Louis Vuitton luggage over the threshold with a grunt, already complaining about how the Uber driver had taken the long way and how her feet were still swollen from that stupid snorkeling excursion Greg insisted on. Greg followed close behind, distracted with a work email, because heaven forbid a week away from his laptop didn't turn into some kind of existential crisis. The kids were bickering over who got to use the bathroom first, and their dog had puked in the back seat on the way home from the airport. In other words, it was the picture-perfect return of the average dysfunctional American family. Then Val stopped in the middle of the foyer because something felt off. Not wrong exactly, but off. The air was still. Too still. The house didn't feel lived in. Not in the way it should have after just a week away. No faint scent of Febreze. No soft hum of the refrigerator door not quite shut. No pile of junk mail awkwardly stacked on the kitchen counter. Just silence. And then she noticed the garage door was half open. "Greg," she called, suddenly alert, eyes narrowing like a cat that's caught a scent it doesn't recognize. "Did you leave the garage open?" Greg didn't even look up from his phone. "Nope. Maybe the neighbor came by to feed the dog or something? We had her at the kennel, Greg." "Right. Then I have no idea." She stepped into the garage, and the absence hit her like a slap to the face. The Nova was gone. Not just moved or covered, gone. The space where it used to sit looked like an empty stage after the curtains dropped, bare and echoing and wrong. The concrete beneath it was cleaner than the rest of the garage floor, like the car had been cradled by memory itself. At first, denial clung to her like a wet towel. Maybe it had been towed? Maybe it was stolen by some junkie? Maybe Greg moved it to a storage unit without telling her, which was just the kind of idiot thing he would do. But somewhere in the back of her throat, like the taste of metal, was the truth she wasn't ready to say out loud. "Janine," she whispered. It took their mother less than 10 minutes to arrive after Val's panicked call. She stood in the garage in her pressed cruise shirt, 10 lines sharp against her neck, and didn't say a word for a full minute. Just stared at the empty space like she was trying to summon it back with sheer will. "She took it," Val said flatly, arms crossed, voice tight like a rope. "That's the only explanation. She waited till we left, and she just took it." "She wouldn't do that," their mother replied, but it was half-hearted and thin, like even she didn't believe herself. "She absolutely would." "Are you kidding me? You left her behind on purpose and then expected her to just sit quietly and knit while we were in the Bahamas?" She knew the cruise was going to be stressful. "That's not an excuse." "You know what? I'm calling the police." "No," their mother snapped, finally stepping out of her fog, her voice sharp and sudden. "We are not making this a scandal. That car was hers. Her name's on the papers. If this gets out, we'll look like fools. We'll look like we abandoned her. Because we did." Silence again. That sentence hung there between them, heavier than anything they'd packed in their carry-ons. They spent the next 3 days trying to spin the story in ways that didn't make them look like the villains. Maybe Janine had a breakdown. Maybe she needed time to herself. Maybe she just went off to write a book or find herself in Montana, who knows. Greg offered to track her phone, but it had been turned off. Their mother checked her email, nothing. Val called the last number she had and got a voicemail that had been the same for 5 years. "Hey, it's Janine. If this is important, I'll know." No one laughed at the irony. Then the letter arrived. It was handwritten, mailed from somewhere in the middle of nowhere, no return address, just their family home scribbled in blocky script that looked exactly like Janine's. Inside, a single sheet of lined paper. No dear anything. No explanation. Just one line. "You left first." Val stood in the kitchen reading it again and again, her thumb rubbing the edge of the paper until it nearly tore. "That's it?" Greg asked, peeking over her shoulder. "Yeah," she said. Their mother sat down at the table, suddenly looking 10 years older. "She's not coming back, is she?" Val didn't answer. Because deep down, she already knew. There's a strange kind of peace that comes when you finally realize no one is coming to find you, not because they can't, but because they won't. And maybe more importantly, because they never really did in the first place. The day I drove out of Nebraska and kept moving west, I felt it begin to settle over me like a weighted blanket. Not comfort exactly, but something that looked close enough to keep me warm. For the first time in years, no one was waiting for me to shrink myself. I didn't have to apologize before I even opened my mouth, or brace for the way my sister would sigh when I said something she deemed too intense or too heavy for the moment. I didn't have to keep explaining why I didn't want kids or why I wasn't interested in rejoining the family book club that only ever read things Val picked. Out there, surrounded by strangers who asked no questions, I was finally no one's disappointment. I found a small town tucked in the edges of northern Arizona, the kind of place where people still waved at each other out of habit, and the local diner doubled as a hardware store 3 days a week. The air was dry, the sunsets biblical, and the silence was so complete at night that it actually made me uncomfortable the first week or so. But then it started to feel right, like the space I needed had always existed, just not in the places I'd been told to look. I rented a room above a second-hand bookstore owned by a woman named Camille, who wore wide-brimmed hats and never asked questions beyond cream or no cream when she handed me coffee in the morning. I told her my name was June. It wasn't even close to Janine, and that was the point. I didn't lie about everything, just enough to make the new version of me feel real. I got a job shelving books and occasionally helping customers who were mostly locals looking for gardening guides or old Western novels. There was something beautiful about the predictability of it all, how nobody knew who I had been before, and nobody seemed interested in guessing. I could exist as I was, stripped of the roles ID never asked to play. Daughter, sister, the quiet one, the problem, the disappointment hiding in plain sight. But healing isn't always a straight road. It's not some glossy movie montage where you go hiking and cry into a canyon and suddenly understand your place in the world. Some nights, I still heard Val's voice in my head, sharp as broken glass, reminding me how I always overreacted. I remembered how Mom used to reach for her wine glass when I started talking about my job, as if even my work was somehow an inconvenience. I remembered Dad, too, but those memories were softer, like sun through curtains. I held on to him most of all. About 4 months after I disappeared, I got the urge to go back, not all the way, not to show up with my arms crossed and my head held high like some scene in a courtroom drama, but just close enough to see what the absence had done to them. I wanted to know if they noticed the silence, if it haunted them, or if they'd just found a way to replace me as easily as they'd excluded me from the cruise in the first place. So I went back. Not to the house, but to the neighborhood. I parked 2 streets over, walked with the hood pulled low and sunglasses bigger than necessary. I wasn't hiding exactly, I just didn't want to be seen until I chose it. The sun was setting when I turned onto my old street, and for a second, everything looked exactly the same. The rose bushes by the mailbox. The cracked driveway Greg never fixed. The porch light still flickering, which no one ever seemed to replace even though I pointed it out 3 times. I stood across the street, behind the neighbor's hedge, and watched. Inside, through the wide front window, I could see them sitting around the dining room table. Val was talking, of course she was, and everyone else was nodding politely, the way people do when they're too tired to argue. Mom looked thinner, older, like the cruise tan had finally worn off and taken some of her armor with it. Greg was scrolling his phone under the table like always. The kids looked bored. No one was laughing. No one was yelling either. It looked, in the dullest, most exhausting way, peaceful. But not in the way Val meant it back then. It was a hollow piece, a plastic one. The kind you set on a shelf and dust twice a year. And suddenly I knew. They hadn't replaced me. They'd just removed the mirror. Without me there, they no longer had to reflect on who they were. There was no one left to remind them of the cracks in their shiny surface. And maybe that was their version of healing. But not mine. I turned slightly, and that's when I saw it, my own face, dimly reflected in their window, ghostly and real at the same time. Not younger, not bitter, not angry. Just watching, just there. A flicker, a shadow. Something that used to belong, but had moved on. I didn't knock. I didn't call. I didn't leave a note or a dramatic message written in lipstick on the bathroom mirror. I simply turned away, the gravel crunching under my boots as I walked back the way I came. Some ghosts don't haunt you. They just remind you what freedom tastes like. And I had never felt so free.